The most important part of every airplane flight is the captain and crew, because airplanes can't fly themselves, except for these ones can. A ghost flight, or sometimes called a phantom flight, is an airplane that keeps traveling long after everybody on board is incapacitated, or at least the crew is, and generally runs out of fuel and then crashes. And today we're going to talk about 3 of the craziest ones. Thanks for watching Informal History, the channel where we condense big broad subjects so everybody can enjoy. Helios Flight 522 was a Boeing 737-31S operated by Helios Airways, which was a low-cost airline flying out of Cyprus. The flight took off from Cyprus at around 9 a.m. local time, and then shortly after takeoff, the crew noticed irregularities with the aircraft's cabin pressurization system. This is really important. The reason that you don't die of hypoxia, or at least pass out, when you go really high in the air on an airplane is because it is pressurized. If you were at 35 or 37,000 feet on your own, say in a parachute for a sustained amount of time, you wouldn't have enough oxygen, it's called hypoxia, and eventually you would just black out and eventually die. So airplanes pressurize the cabins so it feels like you're closer to around 6,000 to 8,000 feet above sea level, which is where jet lag comes from, by the way. It's not really the time change as much as the fact that you're exhausted from being so far above sea level, or at least that's the way it makes it seem when the airplane is pressurized, which is another reason that private jets are so luxurious, because they can be pressurized much better, so it's only around 2,000 or 3,000 feet above sea level that you feel, and that's way easier on your body. That's going to be important in 1 second. The communication with the crew was lost when the plane entered Greek airspace. The traffic controllers in the Greek airspace were unable to contact the flight, and this obviously raised huge concerns about a possible hijacking or technical malfunction. Generally what happens in these scenarios where it might be a hijacking or something else is they'll scramble fighter jets. Fighter jets are way faster and more maneuverable, and it gives the opportunity for other pilots to see what's going inside the cockpit. In this case, 2 Greek F-16 fighters were scrambled to intercept the plane as it continued on autopilot towards Athens. But what the pilots in the fighter jets saw was an empty captain's seat in the cockpit, and then the co-pilot was slumped over the controls. It was determined later that the pressurization system failed, and this caused oxygen levels in the cabin to drop, resulting in hypoxia. Well, this was for everybody except for one flight attendant who realized what was happening and had a portable oxygen machine that she was breathing through. She did have some flight training and she tried to do her best, but inevitably she was not able to land the plane safely. And eventually, it ran out of fuel and crashed into a mountainous region just north of Athens at around 12:04 p.m. What was determined is that before the plane took off, the automatic pressurization wasn't switched on. Nobody realized this while they were up in the air, and because of this, there was no pressurization and everybody perished. The only good part about this is now we have systems in place where that pressurization, this really can't happen again. It's automatically on in most airplanes. The unfortunate part is so many people died, and then of course because of the aftermath of this, Helios Airlines no longer existed. In 2006, they closed up shop. In 1962, Flying Tiger Line's Flight 739, which was a Lockheed L-1049 Super Constellation, which is a large propeller-driven airplane, mostly used as a cargo airplane, was on a top-secret military mission during the Vietnam War. The aircraft was transporting U.S. Army soldiers and supplies from Travis Air Force Base in California to Saigon. Saigon is now Ho Chi Minh City, but either way, this is a very contentious time in American politics and the history of the entire world, and this again is a top secret mission. Nobody is supposed to know this plane is even in the air. And because of the nature of the aircraft, there had to be several refueling stops in between. The plane took off at 12:57 a.m. local time on March 16th, 1962. The flight was on a segment between Guam and Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines when it vanished. There were no distress signals, there was no mayday, it just vanished off of radar. Obviously, there was a search and it was massive. An operation was launched involving US military ships, aircraft, and civilian vessels. Over 144,000 square miles of ocean was scoured, but no wreckage was ever found. Not a single trace of a human or the plane until this day, has ever been spotted. There's many theories we can speculate when things like this happen, but a lot of them just don't make sense. Some reports suggest that the flight may have exploded mid-air. A Liberian tanker ship reported seeing a bright flash in the sky around the same time, which might indicate the explosion, but there's really no conclusive evidence. There's always the mechanical theory, which is a mechanical catastrophe where just things stop working. The problem with this is this plane was known for being very reliable and there was no distress signal. And then the most wacky theory that probably never happened, a meteorite must have smashed it. The chances of a meteorite hitting a moving plane is next to zero. What do you think happened to this aircraft? Let me know in the comment section below. The one that you've definitely heard of is Malaysia airline flight MH370. 370 took off from Kuala Lumpur at 12:41 a.m. local time and was scheduled to arrive in Beijing at 6:30 a.m. For the first 38 minutes, nothing was going wrong. It was rather routine. That's when the final transmission from the cockpit rang out and said, "Good night, Malaysian 370." This was at 1:19 a.m. and then no transmission was heard after. 3 minutes later at 1:22 a.m., just as the plane was leaving Malaysian airspace and entering Vietnamese airspace, it suddenly disappeared from radar. The transponder which communicates the aircraft's location to air traffic control was turned off and the MH370 went completely off the grid. Now, despite the fact that civilian radar lost the airplane, it was still visible on military radar. The airplane was tracked going way off course. MH370 made a sharp turn to the west, flew back over the Malay Peninsula, and it was tracked for about an hour before disappearing from radar entirely at 2:22 a.m. Miraculously, after disappearing from all radar, a satellite owned by a British company, Inmarsat, continued to receive hourly handshakes or pings from MH370's communication system for 6 more hours. The data revealed something very peculiar. The plane likely flew south into the remote Indian Ocean, far from its intended path, and the last ping from the aircraft happened at 8:19 a.m., which suggests that the plane probably ran out of fuel and crashed into the southern Indian Ocean. This is over 1,500 miles from Perth, Australia. There is nothing even close in the vicinity to where this plane likely finally crashed. There was a huge effort, the biggest in all of history, to find a missing aircraft. For a very long time, there was no spotting of any bodies or wreckage at all, and then finally, in 2015, something happened. A piece of MH370's wing, known as the flaperon, washed ashore on the French island of Reunion in the Indian Ocean. And over the next few years in Mauritius and Madagascar and that area of the world, bits and pieces of what we think were part of that specific plane finally floated ashore. But there is no big wreckage. There's none of the black boxes, nothing that can be for sure identified as part of this plane has really ever washed ashore besides the small fragments. The craziest part of this whole thing is the conspiracy theories and then the actual theories. Some say the plane could have been hijacked, but there's really nothing to show that this happened or anything like it. In fact, the most common theory now that is really recognized used to be a conspiracy theory. The pilot of this aircraft had a flight simulator at home. In the flight simulator that he had in his house, it's seen that in his history, he's done this exact flight path, or the one they think it took on its final flight. It's thought the pilot might have depressurized the cabin, rendering everybody in the cabin and crew to be hypoxic. They would have run out of oxygen and all passed out. And then he sat there in his cockpit all alone for almost 6 hours, just waiting for the plane to eventually run out of fuel and then dive into the ocean. So was it a murder-suicide or was it something else? You be the judge and let me know in the comment section below. And while you're down there, give me an idea for future videos. That's where I get all of the ideas. And of course, please hit the like and subscribe. Helps the channel a bunch. And because I do videos every weekend, I'll see you in the next one.